Well, we are very much approaching the Christmas break for the House of Commons, which means there's only a couple more days left for them to actually appear for question period. And let me just tell you, tensions are higher than ever with the rise in cost of living, with the rise in home heating, the rise in fuel, the additional carbon taxes. Everybody's panicking because Canada's just not feasible for living anymore, and the only ones really advocating for that are the Conservatives. And Pierre and Justin Trudeau battle it out today on the House floor for pretty much that exact reason. Plus, Trudeau is now a self-appointed farmer. That's right. There's a farming company that grows mushrooms in Ontario, I believe in Carleton, which is Pierre Poilievre's riding, if I'm not mistaken. Please fact check me down in the comments if I am wrong. And they now have to pay 4 times the amount for carbon tax. They used to pay $100,000 in tax per year. Now they have to pay $400,000. Absolutely insane. So sit back, relax, and watch this clown show happen. I know a lot of people don't like question period, but this gets pretty ruthless and pretty brutal. But before we get into the highlight reel of today's question period, I have a message from today's sponsor. I want to thank today's sponsor, Private Internet Access. We've teamed up together, and PIA is willing to offer my audience 83% off by using code SUNSHINE. Now, here in Canada, with Justin Trudeau in power, not only is he kind of like a communist dictator, but he's also censoring the internet, which is why you need a VPN to encrypt yourself and be able to bounce around different geolocations to really mask your not only digital footprint, but to mask your identity, because right now it's hard enough as it is to even get the news. That's right. Bill C-18 prevents users, everyday people such as yourself, myself, from accessing simple information that is our freedom of rights to information here in Canada. If you go on Facebook, you currently can't even see Canadian news. It's wild, and who knows what's next. Maybe he's going to ban everything with Google, maybe here on YouTube. So you need to cover yourself and protect yourself with a VPN such as Private Internet Access. And what better way to do that here in Canada than having 83% off? The link for that is down in the description below, as well as the pinned comment. Use code SUNSHINE with Private Internet Access for 83% off. Thank you, Private Internet Access, for sponsoring today's video.
Oral questions.
Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Here we go, folks. Drop some W's in the chat for Pierre.
For 8 years, this Prime Minister and NDP Liberal government are not worth the cost. He said that he was taking on all this debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to. Well, now we learn that Canadians are spending more on household debt interest than at any time in Canadian history, more than the American families were during the 2008 financial crisis that almost brought down the global economy. Will the Prime Minister reverse the inflationary high tax policies that have indebted Canadians and driven up their interest rates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The audacity of this Conservative leader knows no bounds.
Right.
Just last week, he voted against a national school food program, and now he rises to talk about affordability.
That's right.
Let's be clear. This Conservative leader has no long-term vision for this country, with or without glasses. It takes more than a couple of bags of McDonald's to feed Canadians. That's why we're going to continue to step up and be there with investments for Canadians, while he talks about cuts and austerity and then goes and votes for cuts and austerity.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians can't even afford to feed themselves a couple of bags of McDonald's after 8 years of this Prime Minister taxing their food. Speaking of food, you know the only problem with his school food framework? It doesn't fund any food. Right. It funds politicians to talk with bureaucrats who talk with lobbyists about establishing a conversation towards consulting. It funds bureaucracy and not families. So speaking of one way he can make food more affordable for everyone, including our kids, will he pass Bill C-234, the common sense Conservative bill to take the tax off?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we've seen exactly why, whatever his justifications, they have chosen to vote against initiatives there to help Canadians. whether it's dental support for hundreds of thousands of kids that we've already brought in, with more support for seniors. They chose to vote against months ago, Mr. Speaker. They're continuing to step up and vote against the programs that matter. And while they seem not to care about climate change and want to sit back and watch the world burn, they're actually going to watch Canadians' food sources burn as well.
Here, here.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, it is that Prime Minister that is burning a hole in the pockets of Canadians.
Yes.
He voted against his plan to quadruple the carbon tax, a tax on heat, gas, and groceries. Now, the Prime Minister, when I raised the cost of $100,000 for one farm in my riding, which will rise to $400,000, I said, will he call the family and find out and tell them how they're going to pay the tax? He said he would reach out to them. He would have a conversation about how they're going to pay a $400,000 carbon tax bill. Can he tell the House what he told that family about how they're going to come up with $400 grand in more taxes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the price on pollution is a key part of actually making things more affordable for the long term for Canadians by pushing and encouraging innovation. Indeed, our departments reached out to that farm family, to that very successful large mushroom farm in the member opposite's riding, to talk about the programs we have that can move off of their dependence on fossil fuels. We know there's work to do. We know there are investments to make, but that, Mr. Speaker, is how we fight climate change and build a better future. We have a plan to fight climate change. They have no plan because they don't even recognize that climate change is real.
Here, here.
Didn't answer my question about the Carlton Mushroom Farms, which faces a $400,000 carbon tax bill when the Prime Minister is done quadrupling the tax. When we spoke about this on November the 29th, he said that he looks forward to hearing the sustainable practices that the farm has put in place. Well, I can tell him I helped the farm actually get natural gas to its in order to power some of its operations, which is a lower emitting form of energy. But they're still going to face a massive tax increase. How will the Prime Minister advise the farm to pay it? By raising prices on Canadians or shutting down production and bringing in more foreign food?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for farms across this country that are shifting towards natural gas and lower emitting ways of heating and using their various machinery, that is something that we have put in place significant programs to help them with, and that is something we are going to continue to do because it's part of our plan to both fight climate change and build a net zero economy of the future. We have a plan, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party of Canada has no plan to fight climate change. Indeed, they think we should be backing off on all the things we're doing and instead of continuing to fight climate change and grow a strong economy.
That's right.
Taxes aren't going to fix it, buddy.
The Opposition.
Well, the Prime Minister is backing off the things he's doing. Ironically, he's the one that brought in a temporary pause because his caucus was revolting regarding home heating oil. But my question was about the Madero's Carlton Mushroom Farm. He claims that he's got government programs to help farmers use more natural gas at the same time as he's quadrupling the tax on natural gas, which perhaps is the reason why Canada ranks 58th out of 64 when it comes to climate index performance. Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have a climate plan. He has a tax plan. So how will he advise the Madero's farm to pay the $400,000 bill he's sending them?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that climate change is a reality. We recognize that we need to help families and businesses across this country reduce their emissions and continue to prosper and grow in a world where the cost of inaction on climate change is increasing exponentially. That is why we have put in place programs to support farms, programs to support Canadians, indeed, to get off home heating oil, for example, and transform into heat pumps. These are things that we are doing as part of our plan.
Yeah, the heat pumps don't work across Canada, though.
No plan.
That's right.
Let's help climate change. Hit that like button. It helps fight the weather.
Our plan is to bring home production back to Canadian farms, Mr. Speaker. His plan raises a carbon tax on a greenhouse in my riding, which meant that their produce is more expensive in the village of Manotick than a Mexican tomato is in the village of Manotick, sending a price signal for consumers to buy the tomato that had to be transported by truck and train, burning fossil fuels right across the continent. Why doesn't he axe the tax so that we can bring down the cost of farm production and bring home more clean, green Canadian produce?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the price on pollution is simple. Activities that cause pollution cost a bit more, but most Canadians get more money back than what they pay, with checks being sent to Canadians every few months. Big industry pays more than the regular Canadian because industry pollutes more, and as a result, they have an incentive to reduce their pollution. The ideologically driven MAGA conservatives are calling for pollution to be free again, and for the government to take those regular checks to Canadians away from them.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Everything he just said is factually wrong. One, industry doesn't pay the carbon tax. They have a carbon tax carve-out. And as for him claiming that people get more back in rebates, the Carleton mushroom farms will pay $100,000 this year, rising to $400,000 over the carbon tax increase the Prime Minister proposes. And he's sending them tiny rebate checks to their household mailbox. Is he committing today that he's going to send a $400,000 rebate to this family farm?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are there to support families, but multi-million-dollar
There to support families. Hey, chat, let me know. Do you agree with that claim?
To encourage to look for ways to use their machinery and to heat their produce in ways that is lower emitting. That's what fighting climate change is all about. It's encouraging successful farms like the Medeiros family farm to continue to be successful, but to do so in ways that reduce their emissions. We know it cannot ever be free to pollute again, despite what the Conservative Party wants.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Ironically, it is free for Mexican producers to, almost free, they have a tiny, tiny little carbon tax, not even comparable to the $400,000 tax bill that this Prime Minister is proposing. So what is he's saying is that there should be a price signal for Canadians to buy more expensive, polluting foreign food, while we, with the 5th biggest supply of arable land on planet Earth, shut our farmers down. How does that make any sense?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
More than just anyone else in this country, farmers understand how important it is to protect the land for future generations, to pass on the bounty to their children and grandchildren of a great, important job that feeds the rest of us. That is why farmers are so focused on the future, and that is why we are there to support them with a plan and investments that helps them reduce their emissions while they continue to put food on all our tables. We have a plan for that. The Conservative Party refuses to even admit that there needs to be work done to reduce emissions. That is not the way to build a future. Not in Carleton, not anywhere.
Drop a like on the stream, folks.
The Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims that, actually he stated correctly, that farmers are working hard to protect the environment, which is why it's so strange that he wants to punish them with a tax that on one farm alone costs $100,000, that will rise to $400,000 for the crime of using the only source of energy that is available to that farm. So I'll ask the same question I've asked him now about half a dozen times. When he finally gets around to talking to Carleton mushroom farms, how will he advise them to pay their forthcoming $400,000 carbon tax bill? By raising prices on Canadians or by cutting back and bringing in more dirty foreign food?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, 97% of farm fuel emissions are exempt from the price on pollution. The average farm across this country pays a little less than $1,000 on natural gas emissions through the price on pollution. So one can only imagine how much natural gas this successful mushroom farm must be using for their cost of the price on pollution to be that large. And we will happily work with them to switch to a lower emitting approach to doing and protecting.
The drama teacher is now a farmer. Look at that.
Last night at committee, the hand-picked Liberal chair of this Prime Minister's billion-dollar green slush fund was exposed as having used staff at the fund to round up $10 million for her project that had been deemed ineligible. And then she literally ran out of the committee, shutting off the cameras because she didn't want to answer any more questions. This NDP Liberal government failed to protect taxpayers from embezzlers and swindlers to the tune of $150 million. After 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth that cost. When will Canadians get back their missing millions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Innovation has already accepted the resignation of the CEO and chair. When allegations are made and issues arise, it's both appropriate and necessary for there to be a review of the matter. Those investigations and reviews are currently underway, and we look forward to the results of those investigations.
The Honourable.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, it's going to be more in depth than the whitewash investigation that this Prime Minister and his minister put forward. They're under investigation by the Auditor General, 2 Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner investigations. Their board chair, his hand-picked chair, resigned in disgrace along with the CEO. The Prime Minister was handing out millions after his minister knew that his insiders had their hand in the cookie jar, taking $150 million taxpayer dollars. This Prime Minister isn't worth the cost after 8 years, and his NDP Liberal government couldn't be more out of touch. So who got rich and where did the missing millions go?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
In service of making cheap political points, the Conservative Party of Canada can't take yes for an answer. Independent officers of Parliament are investigating. A third-party review of the allegations is underway, and we're committed to ensuring organizations which receive federal funding adhere to the highest standards of governance. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to fighting climate change and drawing in investments,
We're going to tax Canadians to death, right?
we have a focus on doing it in
We have a tax plan
that's going to grow the economy and support Canadians. The Conservatives have no plan whatsoever. All they can do is try and
In no way, shape, or form does taxing people for climate change grow the economy.
Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who said veterans were asking for more than he could give. He sued them in court after he said he never would. He's caused the homelessness that he just talked about, and he spends the money on more bureaucracy instead of on our veterans. Now, he asked how much that the Carleton mushroom farms is spending on gas. He said they're spending too much. I have their bill records here, Mr. Speaker. In November alone, it was $11,866, prorated to about $100,000 a year, which he wants to quadruple to $400,000 a year. Once again, should
On
the farm
taxes,
raise prices on consumers or cut production so polluting foreign farms get the business?
$400,000 on taxes for a mushroom farm.
Mr. Speaker, the average farm family, the average farm in Canada pays far less, around 1% of what that very successful farm is paying. Because the reality is,
The reality is, there you go.
farm fuel
Precursor for Liberal talking points.
exempt from the price on pollution. That is why we are continuing to move forward with programs and supports to encourage farms across the country, particularly very successful farms, to look at ways to reduce their emissions as they move forward into a net zero future.
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
So that's his attitude now. Remember when he called small businesses wealthy tax cheats? Now he accuses the Carleton mushroom farm of being too successful. Therefore, they need to pay higher taxes. He clearly has no idea about our food supply chain because, of course, grains have to be dried, and the fuels for drying are now taxed. Barns have to be heated, those barns, that heating, are now taxed. There's a common sense Conservative bill to axe the tax on those farmers to lower the price of the food. But if he doesn't believe that this tax costs farmers, will he sit down with the Madero's Carlton Mushroom Farm and inspect their bill personally?
There you go. He's going to say the budgets balance themselves.
Mr. Speaker, our government reached out and will continue to reach out to a range of farmers across the country who want are concerned about climate change, who want to preserve our land for future generations, who understand, unlike these MAGA conservatives, that there is no choice anymore between protecting the environment and growing the economy. While the conservatives want to take us back to the Stone Age, we're going to continue to invest.
Oh, he's still sticking on that one, eh?
Farms, supporting businesses, supporting Canadians, while we reduce our pollution, reduce our emissions, and build a stronger future for everyone.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, he's missed all his targets except for the 1 year when the Canadians were locked down. His own Environment Commissioner says that he will come nowhere near meeting his 2030 targets. And now Canada ranks 58th out of 64 on the Climate Performance Index. So his tax is not working. And nor does he seem to understand how food arrives. Food doesn't come from the grocery store, Mr. Speaker. The average farmer in Canada has to spend $150,000 on his carbon tax for barns and drying, and that all has to go to the consumers. Won't he pass our common sense bill to axe the tax on food?
There you go. Yo, Pierre is so good at this.
Mr. Speaker, when we took office 8 years ago, Canada had no...
Trudeau looks quite unhealthy.
It's very modest.
Am I the only one that's seen that?
For government's even very modest environmental targets. We not only have...
Even Trudeau can't afford food right now.
We put in place new, ambitious targets that we are very much on track to meeting, Mr. Speaker. We have decreased our emissions over the past 2 years faster than any other G7 country, and we will continue to lead the way on demonstrating that you cannot have a plan for the future of the economy if you don't have a plan to fight climate change. That's what we're doing. That's what they are not.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he is wrong on the facts. Under the previous Conservative government, we actually reduced emissions while growing the economy. We did it through technology and not taxes. This Prime Minister, by the way, I said earlier that Canada ranked 58th out of 64. There's a new publication of the ranking, and Canada is now 62nd out of 67. In fact, we've fallen. The higher the tax, the worse the ranking. So, will the Prime Minister finally get rid of his tax plan and come up with an environment plan?
Yep.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are on track to surpass Harper government's 2030 target, and the latest emissions protection show Canada is on track to achieving our government's new, ambitious and achievable 2030 climate goal. Our plan is working. We're seeing companies around the world invest in Canada. We were the third largest country in terms of foreign direct investment in the world earlier this year because people are noticing Canada's leadership on fighting against climate change. But that party continues to vote against measures to support our farmers.
All right, Chad, get your thumbs ready.
In a cleaner economy, measures to protect Canadians and their economy from the challenges of the future. We will be there for Canadians.
Drop an L for Trudeau. Drop an L for Trudeau in the chat. Let's go, folks.